Righto, it's now the weekend after the Great Mayoral standoff. Darcy got turfed out. I'll talk about the vote in a second, but I wanted to do a quick follow-up for a couple of reasons. Firstly, correction to my big long spiel when I'm trying to explain the backstory of the development over at Marrickville. One little quite important detail that I skated over, or I got wrong in the sense I compressed it, was that meeting on the 28th of August, the 2018 meeting which I talked about, which sort of where the councillors were voting on a particular component of the development in Marrickville, which then sparked the posts that got everyone into trouble on Pauline Lockie's side. I said, oh, well, the council staff had said we can work with this. That's not true. You can go and look at this. What was under consideration was what's called the DCP, Development Control Plan, which is one of the big planning instruments that you have to amend when you're amending zoning. It's one of the instruments by which you then negotiate what's called developer contributions, which is money that developers like Danius and Tago, who want to build a private project, have to make or agree to make to collective, community infrastructure, road access, traffic plans, drainage, that sort of stuff. So the key things to come, the staff had said, look, this has been out on exhibition, we've amended it, and they were saying, don't put it on public tabling yet, which is the last part of the process. Darcy Byrne is the incoming kind of Leichhardt interloper mayors, because remember, amalgamation's only just started, said, look, I've never seen a DCP have to bounce backwards and forwards. He also queried potentially a $50 million infrastructure shortfall. It could be $50 million. Darcy Byrne queried that number of the staff and said, where'd that number come from? It's a bit of a fudge. Vic McCree made the point. Now, Vic McCree's an independent Marrickville ex-mayor. He would have had his head all over the details of this. Right? He made the point to the Greens, who were really saying we should heed the staff. He made the point that in the development that had sort of the proposal so far, there was already huge amounts of money being allocated to things like parking and tree planting. There was a lot of benefit. The Greens raised this David Tierney fellow. There was another Labor affiliated councillor who was in the mix there too. But the Greens essentially were saying, oh no, we must heed what the staff say. You get the sense, and I don't know, you do get the sense that because this was such a long-running thing, that there were entrenched positions, as can often happen, that the staff had got their back up, probably with some of Danius or Toga's people, that there was a standoff and no one was giving ground. Also that probably a fair bit of turf, bruised egos. Here comes big Darcy Byrne striding in there with his Leichhardt Labor, councillor taking over the joint. The Greens, pushing back. In that mix is Pauline Lockie, brand new independent councillor, and she says in the debate, you can go and watch the debate for yourself, and you should for other reasons. She said, look, I've made a point of getting into the details. She had attended meetings between council and the developers, so staff waving this big scary number around. So that was why she voted against it, and it was carried, as I said. The DCP was approved. It was put on show, and that was where those posts on her site and from her supporters sparked it, and that in turn led to Darcy going to the CRT. As I said, lots of different questions about where did that 50 million come from, what are the entrenched positions here. Obviously, Vic McCree versus Colin Hesse. Colin Hesse had been acting mayor. These are two experienced local turf councillors, two guys who know this about like the back of their hand. So even though the staff were voting one way, the fact that at least one of the two experienced councillors were happy to be a bit sceptical about that, that's another indicator. If you have the time, watch that debate though, because essentially none of this alters the material kind of aspect of my last big post, because within 6 months they came back and it turns out that this big $50 million infrastructure, which was probably more like $10 or $15 million once they sort of had a look at exactly what infrastructure needed to be done and what funding shortfalls for. These processes are ongoing. Developer contributions is a policy area that's been undergoing reforms, which are still going on at state level. Lots of arguments about value capture. How do you capture value from private sector Private sector gain, that is the result of collective taxpayer spending. Now that's a big issue for us because it will happen a lot down at Bays West Precinct. But it's also an issue in WestConnex. You know, I often say to people who hate WestConnex, particularly residents of Lilyfield, they say, oh, no. I say to them, look, you know, you can have a beautiful big park down here, all this less traffic, underground traffic, you're going to have a metro station down there. All of this is adding huge value to your personal holdings. There are some people in the state, Brewarrina, Coffs Harbour, down in Bega, who are paying for your house to be worth a lot more money, and you've already got a lovely, you know, lots of facilities. So I guess that's, you know, in the whole development scheme of things, value capture is very important. Private projects add value to lots of things, including the value of your home. So the other thing about that debate, as far as the Greens go, is that you will see this instinctive thing, and it's not all Greens by any stretch, but many Greens, they carry this internalised idea that community means community activist, right? The only people who are part of our community are people who've got nothing, well, not nothing better to do, but people who have got the enthusiasm and wherewithal to put a little group together and try to usually stop something, not always, but usually stop something. Everyone else, that's the community. No one else is part of the community. In this case, Danius and Toga, the two developers, and they actually explicitly had this exchange, the Greens and, you know, some of the Libs on the council that say, well, they're part of the community too. Oh, well, no, we're not here to represent developers. Well, Danius has been around Marrickville for 60 years. They've got Timber Place right there on Victoria Road. It's a local family. They've got connections and employment history there. And Toga, I think, started over in Glebe in the 60s, young Italian couple, building up these companies. Now, these companies are big companies now. They're in the community. They're part of the Inner West. Sporting groups are part of the Inner West. If you're more recently on the council, the Greens have been grizzling about Marrickville Golf Course getting a 20-year lease. Golfers are part of the community, right? The same thing. Oh no, the community doesn't want it. Well, some do. Some don't, but some do. Henson Park, they want to beef up their footy operations, particularly so girls can play footy. Great. No, the dog walkers, the community. I call myself a community independent, and you know, it's a lovely word, but it can be weaponised and it can be sectionalised, and the Greens are expert in, I think, you know, starting every debate from the position that, oh, of course, they represent the community. Well, you represent a part of the community, the part that votes Green. And that's great, that's fine, it's a significant part around here. Lots of people out there just don't have the interest or the time to be involved in these groups. So part of my, I guess, role as a community representative will be to try to balance some of that, not necessarily represent just those people who make lots of noise, and that may include developers' interests, but developers are big enough and ugly enough to represent themselves. They can pay consultants to do that, like David Tierney. It's more the kind of people who want to play sport, people who coach footy teams, people who just kind of like mucking around the park, you know, they don't mind the dog walkers, but they want to be able to skateboard there, right? Or they want to be able to do their remote controls or do their Tai Chi or have their little dog walking company or sell coffee to the people down. All of these people are part of the community, right? So that's part of where I see community coming. That's the first part of the update. So just the DCP was the issue, and it was actually a vote that went through technically against the advice of the staff, and that was where Pauline Lockie in particular, her kind of wariness came from. Fair enough. So very quickly, Tuesday night on the vote itself, bit of a farce. It took everyone, it was a remote meeting, it took everyone an hour to get online. There was John Snell was dropping off and Sam Iscan was dropping off and so forth. I mean, you can't really bag anyone for that, although Darcy at one point did. It's a bit of gallows humour. Everyone want to pass a motion seeing if everyone agrees this is farcical enough. You've got to admire a bloke who can laugh when he's probably just about to lose a 90 grand a year job. I mean, that's one of the things about this. I'll talk about this in a bit, because there's been a fair bit of nastiness since. Bloke's lost his job. He's got young kids. Anyway, live by the sword, die by the sword. The deal had been done beforehand, a lot of cynicism. However, first round there were three candidates. There was Darcy, there was Rochelle Porteous from the Greens. She's been a mayor 2 or 3 times before, very experienced, been around. Hasn't been super well, and we wish her the best, because whatever you think about her policies, she's been terrifically committed and engaged, so wish her well. She's not standing for re-election, but she is now mayor again for 3 months. She stood Darcy and Vic McCree, Marrickville independent Lib. Or independent, but probably a sort of rightish conservative leaning, not extreme, but 6 votes for the Greens, so the 5 Greens and Pauline Lockie, the independent lefty from Stanmore. 5 votes for Darcy, so the 5 Labor councillors. 6, 5. The remaining 4 were the 3, so Vic, Rossidi and Julie Passos voted for Vic, and John Stamlis voted for Vic McCree as well, right? So, sort of a version of preferential voting. They drop off those votes. Second round, the vote. Next vote, 7 votes for the Greens. So Stamlis votes for the Greens along with the 5 Greens and Pauline Lockie. 5 votes, 7, 5, 3 remaining votes. The 2 Libs and Vic McCree, they abstained, right? So they said no. Now this is, the pivot, right? Because those 3 voting with the Labor Party were what got the original coalition over the line, keeping the Greens out. That's the material change since 2016, and that's quite significant because, obviously, it's a demonstration that for Labor, get in bed with the Libs, or Libs get in bed with Labor, particularly when you've got a fairly, uncompromising figure like Julie Passos from Ashfield. She's got strong views on social issues that were always going to clash with certainly the Greens, but even the Labor Party, because Labor Party round is the left of the Labor Party. Darcy's on the left of the Labor Party. There's factions, right? So there we go. Congratulations to Rochelle Porteous. Stepped up. She's going to be sort of a caretaker mayor, I guess, for 3 months. Then they had to go through the procedure of deputy mayor. There was another farce when, Councillor McKenna, the Labor Party councillor's nomination for deputy premier, they think they're deputy premier, deputy mayor, went missing, which was, it's a bit messy, right? Her and Pauline Lockie. Nice one. Ambitious. Second term. First term. Rise to power. Good on you. So she'd obviously done a bit of a deal with the Greens and but first round, voting went along the same way. 7-5, 7 Greens and John Stanlis voted, and Lockie voted for Lockie. The 5 Labor people voted for McKenna. Congratulations, Pauline Lockie, deputy mayor. The 3, the Libs and McCree abstained again. And, so obviously the Libs have said, sorry, we're not going to help you over the line again, Darcy, and you can understand why. They've had all sorts of nonsense going on. But it's matters for us because we're going to be doing this again in 3 months, right, after the election. On John Stamlis, John makes a big play about not being a politician. I'll never do that, right? And we're independents. We're politicians. We have to make deals. We have to vote for things. We have to figure out which way we're going to sit. There'll be preferences will come into play, as John knows too well. So John says, we've got to get politics out of local council. Yeah, righto. John's done this deal where he said, I'll vote for Vic McCree because he's saying now because I wanted to give somebody from outside Leichhardt, a bit of a run, blah, blah. Okay, maybe. It was always going to end up as it did. So where John comes out of that now, because he's sort of thrown his lot in with the Green Council, he has differences with the Greens over things like local tree policy. So, and certainly, as I said in my previous one, it makes it impossible for him and for Darcy and maybe for the Greens to work, certainly for the next 3 months. The key here is, remember, we're that far away in Inner West of being declared a hotspot. So Rochelle's got to play really fast catch-up now and plug into all of the one-on-one relationships with not just council staff, but health department staff, quarantine staff, the clinics, health district people. Now, I'm not saying she won't be able to do that, but it is quite a crucial time. So personal relationships are very important when you're trying to fast-track things like more clinics here or more access to injection capacity here or a response to an outbreak in Summer Hill, right? And aged care stuff. This is a time when you actually do want really engaged mayor in particular, because the mayor is the one who can pull believe her really quickly. I'm sure Rochelle will be able to do that. She's had experience, but she hasn't been as engaged as the other councillors. So that is a factor. More importantly, going ahead, what happens at the next vote? Well, I don't know. The last thing I want to say, shit, tons of nastiness and big, and lots of even friends of mine saying, big ass stuff here. Well, you have to keep perspective in those. You can hate somebody in public office like Darcy Byrne, but if you're on the left, if you're a Green, he's for you better him than Vic McCree say, or Julie Bassett, or so you don't want to necessarily kick a guy in the head as he's on the way down. And to his credit, I mean, Darcy's a pretty ebullient character, but he's been out and about saying, let's get some music going. That's it. He's trying to be upbeat. Dawn Fraser Pool's open. There's a predictable fight between everyone about who gets the most credit. I just say, well done, everyone. It's lovely. We need all the cooling down we can get. Alrighty, that's the two follow-ups to that. But I just wanted to correct that first thing about the DCP. And I do, 28th of it, go and spend a couple of hours of your life watching these people. The people you're paying nearly 30 grand a year each, or 90,000 in the case of the mayor, to have these debates. A lot of this goes on under the radar. You don't see it, and because you've got better things to do. But go and have a look. It's one of the great things about being in a democracy these days is that we have never had more access to primary sources. There's no excuse for not knowing. People come up to me, what's the story with Darcy Byrne? I say, well, go and have a look online. You can follow the story yourself. But again, I'm happy to do it. It's messy, and sometimes I'll get it wrong, or sometimes I'll need to correct things. The best thing to do is plug yourself in online and go and watch it. Pop a beer, spark up a big fat one if that's your thing, and it might help. It's all there, so get into those details, because there's good stuff there too. There's good stuff, councillors doing good things. Pauline Lockie saying, I'm being diligent, I'll go and, even if you might disagree with the side of the fence she fell on, at least she's getting in there and having a look. So go and do it yourself, or don't whinge about politics. Don't do both. Be ignorant and grizzled. Cheers.